Good morning, everyone. We're thrilled to have you here at BTF 25. In a few minutes, we'll be kicking off our first session, AI Native Architecture, Designing Systems for a Post-GPT World.
It is great to be here with you all. We are going to kick off this stage today with a wonderful panel from three amazing leaders all about AI native architecture. And they're going to be talking about the implications of building architecture and building platforms in a world post-GPT. I am going to be here with you. My name's Nathaniel, and I like to think of myself as audience member zero. I am here to also be with you on this journey as we learn from these amazing speakers. So, without further ado, I'd like you to warm up your clapping hands as we introduce the speakers and give them a warm welcome onto the stage. So please, can we welcome first an advisory data scientist from IBM, Abdi Taimar. We also have joining us a senior product manager from Microsoft, Shubomi Salami. And last but definitely not least, I am biased because I am also with Monzo Bank. We have a senior software engineer from Monzo, Arinze Ibikwe. All right. Let's quickly take our seats. Can you folks hear me over there on the end?
Yep.
Okay, this is good. This is good. We don't need our headphones. Now, when I think about a post-AI world, a world in which we're building with AI and thinking about the architecture and how we can build good architecture, it makes me think about the fundamental question: what makes good architecture? What makes architecture great and something we aspire to build? I'll start with you, Arinze, because you do this all the time at Monzo, which has to be reliable. How do you think about good architecture?
So it's really great to be here, by the way. This is really interesting because I can see you, but I'm not sure you can hear me, so I hope you can hear me. Yeah, oh, that's pretty good. So yeah, that's a really good question. I think most of the things we talk about for good architecture haven't actually changed much. And if you think about how software is currently built now, most companies have distributed services, right? So you're going to have your databases, your queues, your APIs, and there are different things scattered around, and you're trying to bring all these things together. So the same principles still apply. You want to build things in a modular fashion, whereby you can easily, plug and play stuff. It's not uncommon to hear, oh, I need to change this database, but because we've built so many layers over it, it's such a difficult task. So the more you abstract, things like that still are useful. And then the observability bit is also going to become even more important, because now we were working in systems that are deterministic to some extent, but if you think about distributed systems, they can still provide random outputs as well. So observability in terms of keeping eyes on what's going on in your services, resilience, do you have fallback mechanisms? If it breaks here, can you handle it here? And these are key concepts that actually become more important in the move to AI now, yeah.
I love how you talked about those things, and I think especially you talked about resilience. One thing that good architects love is when the code works the same, whether you've got 1 million people, whether you've got one person, it's still working strong. And when I think about especially GPT and LLMs and other sorts of AI, it's non-deterministic. You can't guarantee you're going to get the same answer. So how does someone build that technology into their product and allow for some of that non-determinism? About you, Shabumi.
Yeah, so with non-determinism in AI and LLM models, to test the mic, I want to ask a question and see, most of us here probably use ChatGPT or other AI tools. Have you ever asked a question and gotten a wrong answer or a hallucination, something that didn't make sense, right? I can see a couple of hands. So that's basically what non-determinism is. It means that 1 + 1 might not always equal to 2, and it means that for the same query, you might get a different response every time, or you will get a different response every time. So when it comes to building products, it adds a level of variability that we now need to build for. And so in traditional systems, resilience is you're trying to avoid failure. You're trying to build in a way that the system is always available for the users to access. But in an AI world, it basically means you're trying to absorb the unpredictability, you're trying to absorb the variability that now exists. And as a product manager, this has become a really big part of my role, thinking about what are we going to evaluate? How do we make sure the user is able to actually access what they need, solve their problems? And there are a few ways that I've been thinking and I've been doing that. I'll talk about three. The first one is evaluation pipelines, right? Like, how do you define the metrics that are going to say AI is doing the right thing in production, right? Some of those metrics could be things like groundedness, things like key points coverage. For example, I work on summarizations a lot, and what we see is that LLMs could summarize the same document in so many different ways, and I have to work with my science and engineering team to stand up sets of metrics to say, hey, we need that loop, we need that feedback loop, we need to know that the AI is doing what it's meant to do in production. The second thing, like Arinde mentioned, would be the fallback scenarios, right? So with AI, it's not just like UX, it's not just graceful degradation, it's also making sure instead of AI to hallucinate, you're saying it's going to ask a question, or it's going to cite a source and say, maybe you should check this document for more information. And you've probably seen that when you use ChatGPT and it says, hey, just go and check out what's happening on this website. And the third thing would be like policy. So most times when we use AI, we think about hallucinations and failure modes, but there's also a very big safety risk. There is like hate, bias, sexual violence, all of those things that unintentionally AI could lead people to do. And that's something that I think when we're thinking about resilience, we have to think about really early on as we are building AI products.
I love how you talked about evaluating and having to talk with your scientists and the different parts of your team to really evaluate that at so many different points in the chain. And I know that you've done a lot of work with data and especially evaluating the data that goes into the training of different models and different AI systems. And how do we not just be there at the mercy of this data that our systems are being trained on?
So I'll first touch up on the point about the non-determinism, and I'll come back to that. So just an interesting point in terms of understanding how these models work. Like, we're trying to find out why we can't have these models be deterministic. But instead, what we've done is a lot of the researchers now are identifying that non-determinism comes from how we build up the systems as a software point of view. So Thinking Machines Lab have a very interesting paper where they have actually been able to show an aspect of why we have non-determinism. So very interesting paper, I would suggest you all go and read. But then there's the rest of that pipeline, as the data, as you mentioned, and also the evals at the opposite end. The data side, that will always cause us some bias. You know, the data itself, you can go in and try to find high quality data, but since the last few years, the internet and all the data that these big providers are using to train their models are being fed with synthetic data that's made by these AI systems. So number one, we can't really fact check them, so we need high quality data. Second thing, this thing called the Goodhart's law, which shows as well that these models now, when we're training them, we're giving them a metric to train for, and what they're able to do, what they're doing is they're perfecting themselves for this metric instead of being good systems that will work for us as individuals. And you know, we're here at Black Tech Fest and we're here for Black History Month. I want to just talk about one paper very quickly. It's Dr. Abeba from Trinity College. She actually showed that by scaling data, images of Black and Latino men, you would imagine that these models, the bigger they get, the better they evaluate, the better they work in a production setting. It actually turns out that they have a higher rate of classifying Black and Latino men as criminals. So it asks the question, you know, if we feed these systems with more data, it's not reducing the bias. Sorry if you couldn't hear me, I was just taught to put it up. But yeah, I'll stop there. Thanks.
That's so interesting, and I love how, well, I'm learning so much, even just rethinking. I've always thought more data equals better outcomes, and rethinking that and learning that it's not just data, and yes, that plays its part, but every single part of that pipeline. And oftentimes we've, over years, as engineers, as architects, we've slowly been building out these best practices of how to do everything to get the best outcomes. And I think of, like, yourself as an engineer and say, like, we are in a world where the technologies are changing. how do we find those best practices in a world where things only changed last month? How do I find the best practices for myself, for my teams, for an organization as we're building this technical architecture?
So I think with that one, it's really important because, like you mentioned, things change very frequently. Particularly with the models, for example, you find out there's a new version like every couple of months. I think there was a time recently where ChatGPT dropped, and then there was like the Anthropic one. So you get that like sequence of different models. The first thing I would say from an engineer's perspective is to actually explore everything you have. I mean, you can't typically use every model or play around with everything. But what I notice with most companies now is, if you think about the way cloud worked, where you kind of get like AWS as your cloud vendor and you kind of stick with that, I think most companies are now experimenting with different companies. So you get like companies kind of building a framework around access to these models. So if Gemini 5 comes out tomorrow or Gemini 10 or whatever, my whole infrastructure doesn't need to break for that to work. And so that's really useful because it then becomes like, okay, I can see this model is performing well in this space. I have this as well in this space. And then you could interchange, play around with them and see like, oh, this is best for my use case in this company. And then the second thing actually is more technical, which actually involves the underlying behavior of these LLMs. And I think it's actually important to know for engineers and for everyone in general, because we're seeing like a lot of new tech, particularly like vector databases coming out now. Graph databases are really useful as well. And what you find is, the blending of things like graph databases, which are very useful for like spotting relationships. So with graph databases, you can almost be enabled for things like fraud detection because you can say, okay, this customer and this customer, we're seeing like some shady behavior here. So we can figure out, well, there might be fraud going on here. But vector databases can't really tell you intent. And that's where like embeddings and semantic search comes in. And that's actually what these LLMs use under the hood, because what they're trying to do is figure out, well, what's the next thing for me here? What's the next predictable token here? And that whole process brings about like embeddings where you're basically converting like text to like numerical representations, and then you're doing some calculations to figure out if I'm in London and I want to go to Manchester, what's the quickest way to go? And then it becomes an easier computation for the machines. And that actually is kind of at the backbone of a lot of the stuff we're seeing now. So hallucinations, for example, you find out that what they're trying to do is figure out what's the closest next thing to this. And it might not always be the right thing. So that's why I think for the strategy in general, I think it's important you understand what you're dealing with as a start. You explore what's available there. Play around with like what works for you. Every company has a different use case, by the way. So there's no like a one shoe fits all right now. And I think finally, the last bit I would say, probably very important as well, is have an idea of what correct looks like in your situation. It doesn't always only apply to engineering, but knowing this is my North Star would actually help you go from the stage of I'm now using AI as an add-on to I want AI to be at the heart of what I'm doing now, yeah.
I love that idea of AI as an add-on, because oftentimes people want to put AI into everything. And it's really interesting because, like, for example, as a product leader, I can imagine many product leaders, many product managers, maybe even audience are having their leadership come and say, oh, we need you to put AI, we need you to do this. But the building blocks of these applications are constantly evolving, constantly changing. Like you said, you've got new ones coming out. From a product perspective, not just in an engineering perspective, how do you approach figuring out how to keep these building blocks and these evolving building blocks a stable part of your wider infrastructure, of your wider product?
Yeah, so I'll say the first thing is there needs to be a mindset shift, which I've had to take personally in my company and in most companies that want to adopt AI. And that is, you're now building for change and not for stability. Like Arinze mentioned, these models are coming out like every other month, sometimes even faster. And so we are no longer in the traditional software building game. Now you need to build in a very decoupled, modular way. And the core skill that you're building, you need to make sure it's abstracted from whatever AI model or whatever AI technology you want to include. for example, I mentioned that I work very heavily on summarization and generation products. And we try different of the models, different ChatGPT models, different Claude models, but the main summarization skill is separate, right? There is the deterministic mode that we try, but we also have to experiment with all of these different models. And so as a product manager, when speaking with leadership, if we need AI, if AI can improve that product, then yes, we can test it out. However, we have different modes. We should build the skills separately from the AI technologies, because you need to be able to experiment, you need to be able to try multiple of these things out and see what really works and what really solves that problem for the user in like the least complex way.
I really thought about the point you said. We are no longer building systems just for stability. We're building them for change. And in order to build for change, you have to be forward-looking. And that really, this brings me back. You spoke about, for example, new research that's coming out. All these models that come out on a regular basis, they're always based on research that was a couple years. I know that timeline, that window is getting shorter and shorter these days. But usually the research comes out first and kind of is a leading indicator of where the technology is going. And I know you do a lot of work in research. You're at the cutting edge of all of this. How can organizations, how can people here look at some of that research and use that to inform their strategy, their thoughts about where AI, where their stacks are going in the future?
Everyone always wants the newest thing, right? Every enterprise comes to us. I work at IBM. They're always asking us, hey, you're the big brother of technology, right? You're the safe bet. What can we do? And the answer normally is, let's look at the latest technology. It could be agents, it could be some new AI thing that's just come out. But the thing that I will say is, there's been an amazing new publication from MIT, and they showed that 95% of all GenAI use cases fail. It's a very interesting research that you can read about, and I think it's because a lot of execs, they feel like they're missing out, and they feel like this is something that they have to just do, instead of looking at it from a use case. There's some areas in your business, like your back office, and Anthropic talk about this all the time, where AI and GenAI is perfect for. And then the future thinking, the thing I'd say about that is, we're talking about engineering, we're talking about how we can build large-scale systems. The thing that's changing all of that is agents. Think of agents as just LLMs with access to APIs and databases and tools, and then just the ability to call itself. I'm simplifying it a lot, but that's right now the thing that's really changing how engineers work, how developers and technical project managers work as well. So I would suggest, the future thing probably is agents. It's already here, more or less. And then there's the topic of AGI. There was a Alan Turing 75th year anniversary that happened this week here in London, and they were trying to talk about that future direction. But I think that's something we don't have to worry about it today. We're struggling to even get that 5% of all use cases through, getting us some revenue from that 5% of POCs.
Well, fingers crossed we don't need to worry about AG1 anytime soon. I like my job, I like presenting, so I want to keep it. One thing I really enjoyed that you said, you talked about that study, and it was a big headline about 95% of AI startups aren't really making any money, any value out of it. And it really brings us back to what you said at the start, where lots of leaders are forcing AI into things which don't necessarily make sense. You talked about how there's only some use cases which AI is brilliant for, and there are some where it's not necessarily going to change the game. And I want to pose this question to all of you. We'll just go backwards from you, Abdi, which is, in your research, in all of these things, how do you think about not just the technology and what's possible, what could be done, but how do you think about end users? How do you think about consumers? How do you think about making those decisions about what should be worked on, what should be included to make sure we're actually adding value down the chain?
So I think with Gen AI, it's the first time in a very long time that the technology is being driven by the end users. It really is a consumer app, and that's why ChatGPT is so great and Gemini is amazing. So I think it's the first time we're getting this bottom-up approach in enterprises where the productivity is at the individual. So I would suggest, I teach AI to a lot of students around the world, and the thing I always tell them is, your best teacher now is AI. Put all of your documents in there, if you need it as a coach, as a researcher. Whenever I'm reading AI research papers, I don't bother reading through it all. I put it through an AI and tell it to summarize. But the last thing I will say is, again, we're here as part of Black History Month. The reason I did my research and I'm doing AI safety is because this technology impacts us as, we aren't the norm in the distribution that the data's been trained on. So how do you make sure it's safe for us? I will leave you with one bit of research that really fascinated me and took me in this direction, which was the research looked at the language that's given to like ChatGPT. It posed it in a standardized English dialect, and then it changed it to an African-American Black dialect based on some American tweets. And based on that, the AI was given one group better outcomes than the other. It was saying that some should be, put into prison, should be given worse jobs. So this stuff impacts all of us today. So I would say just keep that in mind and make sure that when you're using this technology, you think about that aspect as well.
I'm very thankful to have folks like you thinking about this, because sometimes it escapes my mind to think about all of the downstream consequences that this technology has, and that research that helps us keep it safe. And so with that safety and in going into the research and thinking about that, for example, you have to speak to your customers, your products, as you're designing where this is going. So how do you think about where AI fits into your architecture, into your products, as you build for those end customers, those end users?
Yeah, I think with AI tools, it's very easy to fall into the trap of it being a shiny technology. So leaders want to force it into every product, every problem. But as the product manager, my role is to really obsess over what the user problem is, obsess over user trust. And I think now, more than ever, research is more important. Like, what do our users want? What is the core problem that we're trying to solve? And how is AI supposed to help accelerate solving that problem? If the answer to that question is no, then maybe we don't need to add the complexity of AI into that specific feature that we're building. So there's like two things that I tend to look at, and the first one is just in terms of, does diversity add value here, right? Like with AI, we've spoken about the non-determinism. It means the summaries are always going to be different, the generation is always going to be different. So for the type of problem that I'm trying to solve for users, does this diversity add any value? When you think about summaries, documents change all the time, so it actually makes sense that we don't have the same summary every time a user wants to summarize a document. So it's such a great way to solve that problem. Like, we're just going to use AI. We know the summary is going to be different all the time, but the document is also going to change. So thinking about that diversity, how does that add value to the problem I'm trying to solve? If it adds value, there's a high chance that AI will help to accelerate that. And then the second thing is just, will the users trust this? Like, would it be simple enough for users to trust? Are we able to build it in a way that it's reliable, it's insightful, and users can trust that, this is helping them achieve their goal? So yeah, overall, I would just say anchoring on the problem and the user trust is really important, and not trying to add the complexity everywhere.
And Arinze, I'm going to ask you this from a double-sided perspective, because yes, you're building for users, but you also have your internal teams that want to use AI tools to be more productive, to build better, build faster, prototype faster. How do you approach, and how does Monzo and just organizations, how can they approach that duality of serving the builders who are building the technology, and then also building that technology for those users?
Yeah, really good question. So my experience in general so far is the last two companies I've worked at, there's been a push to actually use the tools. So they would provide pretty much access to Claude, Cursor, GPT, whatever. You have access to everything. And then there's a gentle nudge that says, oh, try this out, try this out, try this out. And what you find is some people actually don't have that interest initially. They're like, nah, I'm not doing this. I'm going to leave this. And then some people try it out and then have incredible gains and come back and share that. And then people are like, oh, right, okay, let me then try it out. So that's a strategy I've seen where people share their wins in public, and then everybody gets to see how this person managed to get this amount of work done in 7 hours. It might have taken him 3 days, for example. and then people start having that shift in general towards like being more open to the tools. I think as developers, it's pretty useful, not just because everyone is using it, but I think if you're not using it, first of all, you're almost at a disservice to yourself because everyone else is going to use it. And so companies then have the responsibility of building their own like internal ecosystem for like, this is how we're going to use AI tools here. And then another very good use case I've seen internally is documentation. So this is pretty like generic, but you find that companies have like very specific documentation about stuff. So you might have like Google Docs, Notion pages, different things casted around. And a use case here is like trying to like have their own specific way of like retrieving information for employees. So if I was in a company and you were all in the company and our annual leave was like 45 days, for example, and I went to the LLM and I was like, what's the annual leave? That's not public information, that's company information. And so with things like RAG, where you can like pull in like a source of truth, you add that as like an extra layer on top of the LLM, and then now people in the company can actually have like an internal tool to be using. That's a very good first step. And then going to the next step, customers, I do agree with what Shubhami says here, particularly because I do see like a lot of times there is that nudge to like, oh, we have to have it in here. It has to fit in here, but there is no use case. And another thing I've seen that works pretty good is companies actually try to experiment a lot more. So they would like build out like, it might be a specific feature, something that you can't do without AI. So it doesn't feel like an add-on. So say you want to like add a new thing to your app, but it's not like a replacement for like an API call or something like that, So you're building something separately. It's like a feature enhancement, still tied to the main product. And then you're getting the gains of the experimentation. We also see from customers sometimes that they're actually like, they actually appreciate the honesty when you tell them, this is actually AI generated output, and we're trying it out, give us feedback. So I think being open in that area is actually really useful as well.
Thank you. Folks, it has been a pleasure. We are out of time, but I know that the audience really want to have some takeaways that they can really use. So if there is really quickly in like 10 seconds, one guiding principle you would give that people should take away and think about and can start implementing in their individual lives, in their organizations right away, what is one thing you would like to leave with all of our audience here today?
I'll just very briefly say, ask AI. It's the best tailorized way of finding information. I use it for my research, so why not use it yourselves?
Yeah, I would say understand how it works. I know most people are beginning to use AI more and more. There's a lot of like user-friendly videos, one specifically by the Spotify CEO, where he really breaks it down in a very user-friendly way. So yeah, I'll say understand how it works. That would really help.
Yeah, I'll say just because now everyone has the access to build, I would like people to like experiment more, like try out stuff, play around with these AI tools, make your apps that you've always wanted to, but at the same time know who your end customers are.
Thank you. Ask AI, understand how it works, and try stuff out. Folks, can you give a warm round of applause to our wonderful panel? Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day.